I have 30 days to make a whole game from zero to win this annual game dev competition. The theme for the game jam is secrets. So I'm making a horror game where you'll have to avoid a monster in a dungeon by hiding and finding keys and codes while uncovering the story to escape alive. But you might be wondering, where is the secrets part of the idea? Well, apart from the story that you will uncover, there's also going to be an intro for the game where you will be going for an interview. And somehow, that I'll show you later on the video, you will end up waking up in a secret dungeon for a monster cult. Cool, right? But that will take a lot of time, so let's start small. By adapting a character controller that I had done before and giving a stamina bar so you cannot run infinitely. Since we're going to need to grab stuff like keys and maybe other items, I implemented a very basic inventory system and made a placeholder item so I can test grabbing it and it will display on the inventory. Even though the item is just a cube for now, and the image is a placeholder too. To have keys that have a purpose, we should have something to unlock first. So I made some really simple doors that you can open and close. These can also be locked, so if that's the case, you will need to interact with the door while holding a key to unlock it. Maybe that sounds easy to make, but making those took me more time than I would like to admit. I also mentioned something about finding codes when I talked about the idea. What I have in mind is having a safe box where you will find one of the keys to help you progress through your escape. But for now, I only made this thing that will ask you for the right code and it will turn green when you enter it. Later, I will make it give you the key once I make that key. Now that we have doors and more stuff to place, I spent the day making the first prototype for a map. I didn't really like how it turned out because there is not a lot of space on it for the type of game this is, and the layout is not great either. But that wasn't a waste of time because I learned what I want and don't want for the game's map. Plus, I found and fixed a bug on the player movement script that got it stuck on slopes. Now it's day 4. And I'm moving on to the NPCs. I just made a bean with some placeholder text that you can read when you interact with it. I will just keep it this simple, but later I plan to give it some text to tell you about the lore. I swapped them up for a testing area because now I'm making another bean, but this one is going to be the monster. So I made it huge and gave it a script that will control its behavior. The monster will start roaming around randomly and from time to time it will go to one of the places of interest that I manually place in the testing area. For the monster to be able to see you, I made an invisible box for it. When you enter that invisible box, I launch a ray to your position. If the ray hits you, it means that you're not hiding behind a wall or anything, so the monster will start to chase you. If you get outside of that invisible box, the monster no longer sees you, so it's going to search the last position where it saw you until it finds you again or goes back to roaming. After doing that, I added this bed that you can use to hide from the monster now, but the monster will still chase you if it sees you getting hidden. And don't worry, I will make a model for it that doesn't look like the Minecraft bed. Even though the game is in really early stages, I want to make it look spookier. The way I'm doing that is by putting some light post-processing to make it look darker. Also, I'm adding some fog in the distance so you can't see that far, and gave you a torch so the contrast with the darkness is higher. Before moving on from the visuals, I added some visual cues for when the monster is close to you. I forgot to mention that this game jam has something special called wildcards, which are basically extra stuff that you can include in your game to get some extra net credits on your submission. So I added this timer on the UI to include speedrunning into the game, and I'm making other stuff later that will contribute to that too. But there are still 2 more wildcards to include, so I generated a color palette with 3 colors that I will use for the game to get limited color palette credits, and about the last wildcard, I just won't implement it. I think I was working on making the monster open the doors when going through them, when someone in the chat said I should add head bobbing to the game, and that is exactly what I did. I also made it go faster when you run. I think it added so much to the feeling of the game. That is a week of progress already, so we just have 3 more weeks to complete the game. And as you can see, the game is really far from being finished. Now I've been just working on logic and having the fundamental things in place, but we will move to design in no time. Unless you're scared of beans, the monster of the game is not going to scare you. So I spent the next 3 days finding references and coming up with the design of the monster. Then I passed that design to a 3D model that I also textured with the color palette I generated before and made it a rig so I could also use animations from Mixamo. I put all of that into Unity and this is how it looks now. The monster looks cool and all, but I need to make a map for the game that makes sense. So I drew the design of the map with 2 key points in mind: the start and the exit. Then I made a path between them and started making the rest of the rooms and stuff around it. After having the 2 floors of the map designed, I started painting some points on the map. These are spawn points for the items in the game. There are going to be 2 keys spawning randomly in the green points. An item that the NPC is going to ask in exchange for the code of the safe box will appear in one of the brown points, and the safe box itself will appear in one of the red blocks. With those 3 keys, you can unlock the 3 doors on the top floor. Each of those will have a key fragment inside represented by the purple points. When you get all of them, you will be able to open the door that's on the bottom floor, where you will find the last key of the game. That will allow you to open the exit door and win the run. I put all those things with random spawn points placed mindfully through the map, so you have to explore all of it to finish the run. And lastly, I drew where the hiding points will be. I imported that drawing into Unity and built the map using that drawing as a reference. I also added the spawn points for the items, and this is how it looks now. Even though we have the spawn points, we don't have the items to spawn them. So I just created some placeholder cubes with different colors to represent them and wrote the logic for spawning them randomly. It is now day 10 and the core gameplay is almost done, but let's not lose focus because we still have a lot to do if we want to have the game playable on time. So I just made that when you grab the 3 key fragments they turn into a single item, made that every time you play the save box code will change and you can get it by giving the item to the NPC, and now the save box will give you one of the keys. While I was doing and testing all of that, I noticed that the monster was a little bit dumb. So I tweaked it a little bit to make it way smarter. Now when it's chasing you and it can't see you anymore, it will have some seconds where it still knows where you are. So now when you make a turn to lose it, it will be able to keep up with you a little better. I completed a bunch of other small tasks that day, from which I highlight making the torch sway like this, as suggested by Emi Berix on stream. And that's 2 weeks gone already, leaving us with roughly 2 more weeks to finish and publish the game. The progress seems fine, but there's still no intro, the map looks like a prototype, there are a lot of things that should be fixed, and most importantly, the monster can't even attack you. For the game to be playable, we also need to have the items not just be different color cubes, but actual objects that make sense. So I designed, modeled, and imported the keys and torch, and also a pocket watch that will be the item you need to give the NPC to get the safe box code. After having the models in Unity, I made that when you pick up an item, it will show the model of that item in your hand. And also I made some icons to show up in the inventory. It's finally time to make the monster dangerous. So I made an animation for grabbing and eating the player. That will happen once the monster gets really close to you instead of just pushing you. One of the small things that needs fixing is that the text box for the NPC doesn't close once you speak to it. So I gave it a range where if you go out of it, the text box will automatically close. And since I was working on the NPC already, I changed its dialogue so it will tell you a little bit about the story and that it needs the pocket watch. While testing the game, I noticed that the torch is not really worth anything because it just gives a little bit of light in a really limited area. So to make it useful, I made that if you have the torch equipped, it will decrease the fog density so you can see it further away. We're getting closer to having a playable game and also closer to reaching the deadline. So I started fixing the positions and rotations on spawning points so stuff doesn't float, made a win menu for when you escape the place, another one for when you get eaten by the monster, made a crosser so items are easier to pick up, and increased the camera fob from 60 to 90. Even though the game is not complete, it is playable, so I made a build and shared it with the community. Turns out that when you play the game, the player was going super fast or slow depending on the computers. So that means that the movement speed depended on your FPS. I fixed that so it runs the same on every computer and published it to itch.io. I didn't really test it before publishing it, so as you can imagine there were some problems. One of the biggest ones being that even though you could walk and run normally, I totally screwed up the gravity so you could no longer go downstairs because you cannot fall. I fixed those problems as fast as I could off stream and updated it, but that is not the only problem that was introduced when I made the build of the game. Because some of the doors started spinning uncontrollably, so I started the next day by fixing that and some other problems. Now the game is playable again, but it starts up really abruptly. To change that, I made a main menu where you can only press play or quit because the settings button still doesn't work. But that is not a big deal for now. The big deal is that the art of the game is trash. So I spent 2 days making new models for the places to hide. So this is how the tables, bed, and cupboards look. I also changed the door model and gave them a detail on the front, so you know which key you need to open the locked ones, and the last model was a replacement for the safe box. But we haven't finished updating the graphics, because I also changed the textures for the map, and I modeled, rigged, textured, and set up the NPCs. Yes, NPCs, because now there are 2. Give your welcome to Nestor. This guy already has his own dialogue and story, the only thing that is missing now is his leg, and some expression. So I gave them faces, so you know these guys have had a really rough experience down here. Before the day finished, I made some tweaks to the dialogue box on the NPCs and started writing the logic for handling music and sound effects in-game. So on the next day, I could just find them or make them. starting with the steps of the player and continuing with the ones for the doors, hiding, handling items, talking with NPCs, and more. After putting the audio in place, I made a save system so I could store and display your rest time on the main menu, and also made a pause menu. Don't get me wrong, I know it's cool that we have that in the game, but we only have 2 days before the game jam ends, and there's still a whole cutscene I must make, because the story on there is where the obligatory theme is implemented so we can have our game without it. The next day, I fixed some minor bugs and started making the map immediately. First, I made a drawing for the layout that I quickly implemented, and found and adapted some models that I put as a decoration on the intro scene. And that's all I had time to do before the day ended, leading us to the final day, where my ability to complete the dialogue and make the cutscene will determine if the whole month has been wasted or if I comply with the game jam theme. The NPC was the first thing that needed to be done. I just made some dialogue and reused most of the functionality from the previous NPCs, but this one will leave you after giving you the first lines of dialogue. Then, with the time going by super fast, I made a really simple animation where the interviewer knocks you out. And after it, you will appear in the dungeon where the gameplay happens. And that's the game finished. Or is it? No, it's not, because I made some changes to the monster so it gets closer to you more often, and then submitted the project to the competition. The game jam already ended, so I won't modify the version I uploaded anymore, but that doesn't impede me from spending the next 4 days making the cells where you start, and all the locked rooms, safe zones, where the monster won't go directly unless it sees you there. Redesigning the UI, adding your feedback and suggestions to the game, adding visual changes and decorations, and fixing stuff. The voting period hasn't ended yet, so subscribe if you don't want to miss which place the game got. There are 2 versions you can play, the game jam version and the updated version. Like, go play that game. It's free. I spent a lot of time making it, you should play it, okay? I play it. Play it.